Awesome. So excited to have you both here today. Obviously, you got a new book that's just come out, and there's a lot of things that I'm seeing at the moment with the world of AI, new startups, new companies growing, new things happening. And I mean, this is the first time I met you both on the video call, so I was
Mhm.
finding out some really interesting information just before we got started. So I guess for people that are listening or tuning in, and for myself as well, really, like there's a lot I want to run through about how you're seeing businesses being future proof, what you guys have touched on in your book, how you've seen it change over the past 10 years or so since your previous book. It'd just be good to get a bit of an oversight of like what it is you're doing in the world today. Obviously, what led you to build the book and what your kind of experiences up until now, and get people a bit of a flavour for who you both are. Either with Steve first or Ja-Nae first.
Steve, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I can give you the kind of the so we this is our second book. We wrote Startup Equation back in 2016. We were just talking about this in the green room, if you will. We wrote that when for startups to kind of give them a kind of condensed look at a lot of different things. And I'm a professional futurist. I have a background in product and design. I've worked for a lot of enterprise technology companies for over 35 years, consulting agencies. I was at McKinsey and FTI. And McKinsey, I helped co-create the futures practice, which was a whole nother, that's a whole nother probably conversation because you learn a lot about what people will not just pay for, but where their interests are. Because it's one thing to talk about the future. And I think always when I preface futures work is, futures don't predict the future. We look at possible futures. And I think that's a big part of this book too. There's some scenarios in here. Super shifts, if I may, and Janae has obviously different skill sets and things. She brings the valuable set to it. So she might have kind of we'll call it a dance interpretation of the book, interpretive dance of the book. I look at it as this convergence of human, artificial, and networked. It's this age of intelligence. So my social theory on like ages and eras, which we'll get into hopefully a little later in the call, looks at 200-year arcs with 50-year periods. And we're at this new age, kind of the age of machines is ending. And it sets the groundwork for what is happening. And in terms of, you would hear terms like trends or signals or drivers, but these are larger than even mega trends. These are called super shifts. And there's 9 of them. And what I love about this, and we'll talk about some of the methods, is we put a design fiction piece in this. And if somebody reads it and there's a link, you can get the first 2 chapters. So we introduce a family in 2040 called the Sinclairs, and they are kind of experiencing, is it the singularity? Is it whatever? But it's the effects of it. And they are also in that prologue, but they also come through each super shift chapter to introduce it because they're like living in it. I think it's a way for us to kind of, you think about good plots and stories, right? They introduce the reader through somebody's eyes, right? We needed to do that because it's one thing to just read about things that are happening, right? And it's like, how does this impact me? And we get into, more systemic, and Janae could, definitely touch on that. But it's about giving people the ability to navigate the complexity that's happening,
Yeah.
To build resilience. We call it design the future, shape the future, instead of being reactionary. Janae, what would you say? What would you kind of?
Yeah. So what I would say is for those of you listening and gearing into this podcast, really thinking about the fact that the systems that we've had in the past no longer work, right? And we saw a lot of this start to really strain and break down during COVID. And it was during that time where I was working with Deloitte in Europe to restart Europe and say, how do we actually restart our organizations and systems so that we can not only respond to this black swan, but identify a new way of working and living. And that led to many conversations. And Steve and I have many conversations on the day to day about these things. But we knew that we were coming to the end of this age of engines, right? Like the end of this industrial revolution where we've had these centralized models that are from, that are from the factories that we've built in our towns, that are from mass production, that are from the way in which we have built up our current landscape of globalization. And now we've had this black swan event that we're seeing, great, this is no longer working. It was starting to fizz out before, but this is really sort of a big catalyst. And how do we really know that we're starting this new age? And to Steve's earlier point, it was these tectonic shifts that we're starting to see start to swell, if you will. Almost as if they were waves, knowing that convergence for each of these shifts won't occur. They'll occur at different times, but won't occur for, another 15, maybe even 20 years, depending on the actual shift. And so as we're thinking about how we move into this whole new way of not only working, but this way of existing that is really a coexistence, if you will, with AI as almost our cognitive partner. How do we reimagine what the future of humanity looks like? And that really was a large part of the research and the conversations and even the synthesizing that Steve and I had that took shape for this book. And we're super excited to dive into some of these elements because we're seeing this on the organizational side. That's a large part of where we're spending our time now, and where we have spent our time. So, I come from, I'm an entrepreneur, but also have a background in innovation and am a behavioral scientist. So figuring out not only how to get companies to adapt to technologies, but actually how to get a cultural shift to occur when we are in a whole new age that needs a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah. It's like we were living a science fiction book at times.
Sort of, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the super shifts that's very relevant to our conversation we'll get to is IntelliFusion. But one of my favorites is generational drift. That's the first one in chapter 5.
Yeah.
Because if anybody listening, or if you, Tom, studied any kind of generational structures and models, Strauss and Howe is probably the most well-known in terms of generational theory. They see a saculum period of about 70, 80, some years that repeats. It's 4 seasons, four archetypes.
There's a great book,
and there are different periods of life.
To that, there's a great book called Fourth Turning, and it's basically
exactly
there's waves of innovation.
Right.
Like
so they wrote
seasons of business. Yeah.
Yeah, so both Neil and Bill wrote Generations, and then they wrote Fourth Turning, which and then Bill passed away like 10 years ago. So Neil wrote The Fourth Turning is here, but he also talks about kind of the awakening, the kind of the spring, in that generation, the last cycle. That's the generation that was post-war, the new boomers. They created. They were born during the war too, is that they were the Dylans, the Kerouacs, they were the artists. They were the ones in peacetime to be able to flourish, and every cycle. And they went back like the 1500s in terms of their kind of study. It's like a macro history, just like I did with Ages and Eras. I went back 1,000 years to like cycles to see if I could, the patterns. But what happens if we live to 150? What happens if this entire age? And that's actually the epilogue. Like if this family, like they're alive for 200 years and they're different, we'll talk about different kinds of potential humanity, versions of humanity. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, you can ground it in like your thought now, because we're seeing people that don't retire. They're living longer. They're healthier. Like take it. Yeah. It's a good provocations that people have to really consider now, not even just 15 years.
Something that's happening right now. And it's interesting because your points around what kind of season do you reckon we're in at the moment? I can't remember if you just said it then.
Well, if you look at Strauss and Howe, we're in a winter. And winter is the crisis. It's usually marked by a war. I mean, you could argue, and it's very Anglo-Saxon, American, Western. His newer book looked at more of the other other parts of the world because they might have different time time periods, but do the cycles repeat, or is it just a Western theory? So I want to bring that about up and raise that up as, kind of the not to say implicit bias, but the way that they framed at the beginning. So that was like the Glorious Revolution in England, right? It was the American Revolution. It was the American Civil War. It was World War II. It wasn't even World War like. So now we're in this period. Are we going to have a World War III? Are we going to have another American Civil? Like, I hope not. Could it have been this Ukraine conflict? This because we're fighting proxy war. I think history will tell looking back, but we have a few more years to get through it, as he likes to say, through maybe 2020, and then it kind of changes. But we're seeing culture shift now. We're seeing a lot of changes here in the United States, even in Europe and in UK, right? There's a lot.
There's tons of changes here.
What will be that marked? It's hard when you're in the middle, like you're living in it, to kind of see like, okay, this is the thing. But it is that period, which means that things are. And this book is an optimistic book. There's so much dystopian type of fiction out there, and I'm one to love reading it. But we look at this book, looks at the hope and the change of the movement of humanity to a whole new plane of existence. Not to get all kind of fluffy, but it really is an optimistic look, and it's hopeful. And we wanted to. And the beginning of the book, we write a letter. There's a letter to the children of the age of intelligence.
Oh, I love that. That's like a look back in time to kind of remember.
Well, it's a letter to the children, like they will grow up in this.
Yeah.
Because our son, is 8 years old, and he actually read it for us. We recorded it, but the book's dedicated to him, and it's like you think about, we want to leave the world better for our children and our children's children, right?
Yeah.
And the things that we're on the precipice of right now is transformational. Like, who knows what college is going to be like? He's the graduating class of 2035. What will college look like? What will jobs look like? Who knows, right? You can't even think about the next year or two. So we really wanted this book to kind of give people hope, and at least a way to kind of navigate the chaos and get a sense of what's happening. But yeah, we'll get through it.
Do you think, to both of you, but Ja-Nae, maybe go first, the way you've seen what's happening at the moment, like someone compared it and they said it's like, I forget who it was, maybe it's like Peter Thiel or someone, or someone of those of that nature, Mark Andreessen or someone, and they were saying how at the moment we're in the early stages, just like we were in the internet era, which is why people reckon there'll be an AI, I don't know, explosion, or you'll see who the real AI enablers are and who are just kind of whatever that theory is, like the companies that will be here for the long run and the companies that are just going through a cycle of trying to understand, and it might turn into something else. It might turn into something much more bigger, beautiful, and helpful. But would you have, or how much does it blow your mind, like 5 years ago? Because I can't picture it. I used to work in engineering as a marketing manager, and if you'd have said now, if I was working back in engineering, all the tools I'd have available to me, like to do marketing materials, to do CAD designs, to do I don't know, promotional material for their customers that we had, like Amazon and Coca-Cola and all these places, it's kind of wild. When it's like, it's similar to your point, like still, as much as we've got an idea, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone for your kid's future in 2035. It's and it's just it really interests me, like that vision of where the internet was at 1995 or whenever it was coming around. I don't know, do you see it the same way, or do you see it kind of, you knew, you had a sense we'd be at this kind of stage by now, but maybe not the way it's turned out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, right? When we think about the adoption of technology, it follows the same type of exponential curve. And so the patterns that we're seeing just constantly repeat, and we can look all throughout history. When we think about what some consider Web 2, which is really around 1995, that's really where we saw the boom, right? Where we saw the adoption of the internet, which obviously has been around since early 70s, as we're thinking about ARPANET.
Yeah,
but when we're thinking about the adoption curve, so for startups and companies that are starting now, many of them will be obsolete. because they're building apps that really just, there's no need for that app. It's like, it's like building an app for an iPhone, unless you're actually building part of the infrastructure or building an ecosystem for others to play in, then you're very dependent and are going to need to really adapt on whomever you're reliant on. And so, yeah, many of these companies are not going to be around. What's really interesting, or what I feel is really interesting right now, and we've seen this before, so it's not, from a behavior perspective inside organizations, it's not surprising. But the tension that we see for individuals who really are like, how, I don't want to embrace AI. How do I embrace AI inside our organization? And they're afraid of, tech debt. They're afraid of even changing some of their efficiencies and or how they can actually make their processes more efficient. I'm really impressed with companies like Tomorrow.io. Talking to the CMO, Dan Slagan, over there. He now has a marketing team of 4, and they are, and that doesn't include, he says his number 5 really are his AI tools. And so that whole suite of tools, like, and we talked about this in the green room. I mean, there's a plethora of tools out there, but those tools are going to start to codify, and we're going to start to streamline some of those eventually. But, again, we're moving in a direction where if we're not trying to adopt these tools within our organizations are going to be obsolete, right? Like, AI is your teammate on, no matter what your business unit is. I'm sorry, like that's there is always room for AI to be brought in smartly within the mix, and that also depends, I think, on what the function is. But if you are starting a business that is, say, just built off of a rag, why? I just don't, to me, I use it as a thought exercise. And if you're a first time entrepreneur, I love it. Like, cut your teeth on it, but know that that is not going to be your end all be all, and constantly think about, how can I put myself out of business? Thinking and looking and adapting the technologies as they're in, and as AI shifts, as Gen AI shifts. I mean, when we could talk about various types of AI and machine learning, but it's all moving, and it's all moving really fast.
Mine is a little different of a take.
I love this because I feel like we're going to have these different angles on.
Always.
Yeah.
So
looking at it a different way. I love it.
Few things to parallel. This is a great kind of conversation. So I started doing local area networks in 1990. So I've been in this for 35 years. So I went from like the, green terminals to early networks, and I got into the internet. But I remember vividly, 93, the Telecommunications Act. No, this is not where Al Gore invented the internet. It's actually where they let, Janae mentioned the ARPANET, but like colleges and universities, research that had the internet allowed you to make money on it. Started creating the first thing. There was literally a phone book that was like this big that had web addresses in it. There was literally, you could probably find it. There's an internet phone book. I swear, but I remember hooking up to the, early those early 90s, and I almost moved to California. I wanted to go work for Netscape. So if you look at the passage, 95 is when Netscape came out with their browser. It was Mosaic. Andreessen was a research grad student. I forget the school in Illinois, but he created Mosaic along with Tim Berners-Lee's protocol of HTTP. That's where the kind of the early like visual, you could visually look at it and browse the internet and hyperlink and all that stuff.
Is this it?
What happened is that Microsoft, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there it is.
Found it. There you go. This is great. For those listening just on audio, you got to go look this up. This is like if you can find one on eBay, it's such a great conversation piece. It's a relic of the past.
I love it.
Just like I have a Monopoly Internet, a .com Monopoly game from '99.
Yeah.
None of the companies on there are still around. But if you look at Microsoft had to react with the Internet Explorer, and this is a good history lesson because it's about exponential growth right now. It's about who the players are. Microsoft had to turn. He called it's his tankers and speedboats memo that they had to be little speedboats instead of trying to turn a tanker, right? IBM, there weren't the companies established that were there to kind of make that shift as fast. That's why we had this huge amount of startups. You had the bubble just went crazy, and there's been bubbles in the past. Gartner could call it, you go through hype cycles, right? We went through that with like metaverse, and you could think of all of them, but they eventually become plateaus of productivity. In AI right now, it's interesting because we have, for lack of better terms, kind of oligopolies with like Meta, OpenAI. We have these large companies that are like OpenAI is partnered with Microsoft. So we have this, I think, an accelerated time frame. You don't have like 95 to like 2001. You have like 2020 to like 2023. Like you have shorter windows,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
quicker cycles of hype to plot. Like you're going to have these like almost like a sine wave, and that's incredibly disruptive. It's one thing to kind of adjust to the rate of change. It's another thing to be living in this constant chaos of it, which is I think what's happening right now is that people don't know how to react. There's political shifts. There's so much happening. We talked about the kind of winter period. It adds to that. So I think right now we're not some. I think with the tariffs kind of changed a lot of the stock market. I don't know if we're going to have so much a AI bubble. If more AI companies start to go public in the next few years, maybe. But I think right now there's just this incredible arms race. I think the real thing that nobody talks about, they do talk about it, but is energy. So one of our chapters in the book is called Power Flow. And, I look at this, you can have an electric car all you want, but in the end, a lot, you're just burning coal. So like, do we need a more full stack energy solution? Is fusion going to be commercial in the next 10, 15 years? Probably. So we're going to have to really think about how we use energy because the prior with the internet, we kind of had the power, we could handle that. We had data centers, but this is a whole different ballgame. And that also is going to impact the ability for it to grow, for it to evolve. I think there's going to have to be broader conversations, especially with sustainability, regards to the impact on the planet. It's no good to have an AI that can do all these things if nobody actually is alive on the planet.
That's a very good point. Yeah, it's like,
Kind of need the people to use, So I think my take is that it's not so much a bubble. I think it's a long, but it's the shifts, the spikes are going to be faster, and that's where we have to be able to adapt. And that's again why we kind of wrote this.
yeah.
It's just people just to make sense. So
Well, it's a good point because there's a great guy called Greg Eisenberg, and if you don't listen to his show, it's a brilliant show, and he talks a lot on X and LinkedIn, and I don't know, it's got a big audience, big base, and he's building a lot of different products or brings builders on that are building products, and it's this kind of shift as well, which has made me think about what you're saying, like how people are relying on less tech tools. And like if you fail, you can get started a lot quicker. Like look at what I've built.
Yeah.
Like it cost me like 100 quid. Like it didn't cost much to get going, and off that you can reach all these different people. And you look at you can get started on places like Cursor and Replit and VO and Lovable for free. Like you can use so many credits for free, and those ideas that you can mash up. And someone was saying like the death of SaaS, and I don't think SaaS will die. I think it will adapt like what Salesforce are doing at the moment with Agentforce, and I think that's a part of the seasonal thing. They'll figure out what it is next because they're almost not too big to fail. And I'm not picking on Salesforce in particular. I've got a lot of admiration for Salesforce, but the fact that what these new tools do, I can't remember speaking to a founder recently or someone that's growing like wildfire over the past 4 or 5 years where their goal is to take the company public. Like they just don't care. Like they're more focused on building. Like it's a real fascinating trend. It's like they really want to work backwards from. I don't know. There are ones that are building it around rappers and doing all those things, which I'm not seeing as much of. And I'm not saying I've seen 100% of the market. I've seen a very small sliver, but it does make me think like how people want to look at the negatives of AI, but then okay, would you want to go back and live in 2000? No. So there's your answer. Like it's
well, right, like
yeah.
just the scalability. And I'll take this. I want to hear Ja-Nae, because I want to, a couple things you said was that the way people are adopting this now with SaaS, both of us have worked in SaaS companies, like, and we've mentored a lot of SaaS startups over the years, hundreds of them, hundreds. And we always say, don't build a feature, build a product, right? If you build a feature that all your competitor needs to do is, adopt the feature. See, many companies try and come out with, I'm like, you should work on the product team. Don't do a startup. But I see SaaS with agentic AI and some type of way to kind of model that SaaS becomes almost more of an abstraction layer. It goes below that stack, that there's another way to interact with it. Instead of you having to sit and subscribe to a million tools and go across, the agent will go across and do that. So I think that's where the real opportunities for the next few years for people is create agent workflows. Like if they say if you can map it, you can automate it, right? If you can document it, you can automate it. I think that is the opportunity for companies. And I think also where they go with AI, you're right. I just think about you and I, all of us have podcasts using tools that I'm not here pitching them. I don't have their, their permission, but there are tools that allow you now to just even cutting out all the ums and ahs. Yeah. That's the one thing we can't buy more of is time. But with these tools, we actually can. It's a question of, do we do more in that gap, or do we actually do other things, right? That's another philosophical question, but that allows you to do something else or not, and I think that's changing. So I don't know what your take on this is.
Yeah, no, surprisingly, I actually 100% agree with you, which,
oh my gosh.
I know it doesn't always happen.
Oh my Lord.
I know. But I really do think that next, so I agree with SaaS almost being sort of a next layer with agents layered on top. I think what's really going to be, as far as interesting conversations to consider, are as we think about agent experience, and not only one-to-one. So not only because we will have multiple agents. It's what does our suite of agents look like? How do they talk to one another? And how do they talk to us? What gets actually communicated to us versus what gets communicated to one another? Then additionally, if you have specific agents that have, that have functionality or are handling a piece of your life or a piece of your business, who owns that data? How does that agent get trained and reinforced? And how do you then maintain, we'll say, agency over the life of that agent and what that agent communicates? Because, particularly as agents start to communicate with one another, they're not going to be talking to each other the way, and they don't now, like they don't talk to each other the way that we talk to one another. And so there will be a communication gap, I'll call it, that we don't really talk about now that we should talk about, and also consider identifying some guardrails around, just like we would if we were including AI in our governance structures within our organizations.
Yeah. Have you seen the video with two AIs talking to each other? And I think they're like ordering a takeaway or something. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
I honestly had to double check. I think it's real, but I was like really fascinated. I was like, is this real or is this just made an AI? I was like, I don't know. But it seems it's real. And it's fascinating to see, like maybe to your point, Ja-Nae, that's how they'll talk. And I think it was Mark Cuban who said he can see it where we'll have 50 LLMs in our pocket, depending on what we want it to do and how to work, or, maybe 500, maybe 1,000. But how creative do you want to get, to your point?
Right. So then you have essentially this decentralized network of agents working for you or with you, I'll say. But what information, as they talk to one another, gets shared with you, they will create essentially a behavioral digital twin of you and will start to predict the things that the information that you want, how you want it, when you want it. They'll be preemptive as far as what they offer up. And so as we start to build this network of agents, really having identified the questions we should be asking, and start to have those conversations now, because that is coming sooner than any of us could even imagine.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated to see if there'll ever be or when there'll be, like, not to focus on that particular thing, but like healthcare or in law, if you're in a court case or whatever, and you're already starting to see very early signs of it. Like, well, that's not what your LLM said. When it's like, if you've got some healthcare data and it's like, or you're with your PT or you're in for a surge or whatever, like maybe for kids with their school report, and it's just like, well, your LLM and your agent is saying something different. Like, did you really do your homework? I don't know, whatever the situation is. And I think that way of because I think sometimes CEOs and very smart, knowledgeable people, they seem to forget that people who are kids at the moment will be the leaders of the business maybe in a while, but what they're built up on and what they're learning on, and like what you're seeing the founders today, that I know some of that are 25, 26, and they're getting funded with quite impressive quite impressive amounts of money, but also they've got a very strong user base. Like, it's not necessarily the number of users, but those users are obsessed. Like, they just love the platform, they want to build on it, they want to see how it works, they want to grow that company. It's almost like they have equity in it, like they feel part of it, like it's a movement. And I do think there's people sometimes when I speak to people that they can forget that. It's like, look at the world of VR. People tell me VR is not going to be big. I'm like, go look at 14-year-olds and see how many of them are playing with VR. They are building their lives around it, and the moment they get into 20, 30, 40, that technology, I reckon, you might disagree, I'd love to know what you think or have a different view on it, I reckon that technology is going to come up with them for a very grassroots level. And people telling me that VR and AR is not going to be a big thing going forward, I think it's well, it's not about being right or wrong, but I think they're missing something. It's like, look at them.
Yeah, no, so I'll ask, we'll have Steve chime in a minute, but this is an area where I spend a lot of time. It's where I do a lot of my research. And if someone thinks that it's not going to be big, then they don't understand what the future of the internet is going to be. And they don't necessarily understand that when we think about, and we call this reality remix within Super Shifts, when we think about the future of our world, we will have a digital overlay that exists. So we'll have digital twins that we're interacting with, and we're seeing a lot of this technology around VR and haptics right now. It's been really lovely to see some experimentation around olfactory wearables and technology for VR so that they can activate sense. There's pieces that will need to occur, like the interoperability of moving from world to world. How do we get our hardware to be less clunky? That's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. But we are heading into a world where you will have a holopresence of someone that you're having a meeting with while you're in a pod on your way to work. You head into work, and as you walk into that, and let's just say that you're going to work and you're going to a physical location, as you walk in that door, there will be a 3D presence of pieces of that building that you can interact with and people that you can interact with. So we will have a digital overlay on our world, period. And that is a large part between digital twins in that capacity and these virtual environments. We will be moving seamlessly between them. Now, will that happen tomorrow? No, but that's going to happen.
Yeah. You're seeing it happen. I want to know what you think, Steve.
So many things.
Does Steve agree or disagree?
I don't disagree. I think there's just other things to add on to you had briefly touched upon product design. I did want to, once we get back, the conversation shifted, the earlier stuff on AI and humans, we talk about IntelliFusion is one of the other chapters in the book, and we talk about the subspecies of we call it Homo machina. So I definitely want to touch about this because it all connects. Because when you think about
Quickly,
reality
sorry, not to cut in, Steve.
remix,
What does that term mean? Like, what's the? I don't know what it means.
Homo machina,
Yeah, home remote.
it's basically like the humans and machines.
Okay.
It's like it creates this the machine man, the mechanical human,
Yeah, like
right?
Bicentennial,
It's like
Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. Yeah. Like,
what's that?
do you ever see that film Bicentennial Man, or whatever how you say it, with Robin Williams?
A Centennial Man.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh
Bicentennial.
no, I've loved that film. I
Yeah.
love that film. It's based on the Asimov book. Yeah, I mean it's a question of what is human or humanity. But we were looking, I want to get because we have like 6 different ones, and that's like how you interact. And I think that's something that we need to really consider because if the first time we're building something, we were the thing of the highest intelligence on Earth, and now we're building something that's not right. When we interface with that, which comes to reality remix, I think right now the biggest thing is there was 2 things. One is fidelity of the interaction, and 2 is the form factor of the device.
Mm-hmm.
Form factor. I mean, you could look at Ready Player One in the movie. Like it's very much really simple goggles. It's got to get there because it's like you're kind of wearing heavier ski goggles, and it's exhausting on your neck, your head. Like it's not conducive to all day wear, right? And there'll be glasses like Ray-Ban and Oakley. They're trying to more of a lifestyle brand type of interfaces. Google, I heard, is trying to bring a different version of glass, which we won't have the very
I got their old one.
derogative name.
Yeah.
But
Their Google Glass. I
but
got the Meta Smart Glasses. The Meta Smart Glasses are great. Like, they're brilliant. Like, they're awesome. But the Google Glass, they had a long way to go. Put it that way. But yeah.
yeah, well, and it's like the overlays and that, and it's like we're gonna have to change. Not right now. We essentially type everything. For our mental models have been all about this. We're starting to get into voice. I mean, obviously, OpenAI basically stole without admitting, Scarlett Johansson's voice. It kind of sounded. I'm kind of sad. I would pay money to license Paul Bettany's voice. If I could have Jarvis to talk to, that would be awesome. Because we have these staid voices, and we have to change the way we have to feel comfortable talking and interacting. And the things that Ja-Nae mentioned, the overlays, the glasses, we will be in this constant ways to interact because we have limitations with it now. The only way for it to go forward is we have to have less friction in the way that we ask and prompt and also take things in the world that we want to maybe use in that. So I think it's so much opportunity there. But I think right now, the kids who are in this, they are growing up in VR. They will figure out what they want to be usable because they could put up with a lot at 13, but when they're 25 or they're trying to get their work done, I think the desire or the impatience will drive that innovation.
That's a good way of looking at it. It's fascinating, man, like to see how those worlds are going to come together. Because I saw a video. I don't know what it's going to do to the casino industry, but I saw this was a 17-year-old kid, and he somewhere in America, and it went viral on X, and he basically put these glasses on, and he basically hacked them to show a model. So he built a model into the Meta Smart Glasses, and he played a game of chess. And he was playing a game of chess against his friend. He's never played chess according to what they were saying. And there's a whole explainer video on YouTube as well. And he was basically showing how they tied up a model powered by ChatGPT into the glasses, into the Meta glasses. And I mean, it's definitely illegal against their terms and conditions, I'd imagine. But basically, when he put them on and he was showing the vision, it was telling him what move to make, and he beat his mate, who's quite a good chess player. And you think, what does that do if you walk into a casino with glasses on, where people do wear glasses? Like, it's not just that, all sorts of industries. Like,
My dad plays a lot of blackjack,
yeah,
and he's really good at it. He's an engineer. He can, I don't want to say he can count cards, but because they have more decks, not just one deck. But yeah, if you have like an overlay and you can record all of the cards coming in and coming out of the decks and flow, it can give you probabilities of whether you should double down or you should, yeah, are they gonna outlaw everybody with glasses?
Yeah. Be like,
Sorry, Jay.
yeah.
This is your space. You do a lot of.
No, what I love about about this example is that in many ways we're going to see, and we do see, folks start to democratize these technologies and how they get used and find workarounds, right? And it's in that adaptation that we start to explore what the future of these technologies really can be versus, if we just sort of try to slap our old heuristics on a new technology and say, hey, it's going to do X. To know that you essentially have a teenage kid who is essentially hacking these games.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows me that we're moving closer to that and faster than I think many of us realize.
Yeah, this is it here. So you can see him. So I don't know if one's that sharing, but you can see how they built the model, and basically showed, like, that's him with the glasses on in the top left, and that's him making the moves, and this is coming through his glasses live feed, and it's basically tied up to a model on a computer in the bottom left and showing him on the screen bottom right to top left where to make those moves. And the whole video's on YouTube and Instagram, but it's just, and this dude's like 17, 18 that beat him, and it's crazy to think they're coming up with that kind of idea. But to your point,
I love it.
It's wild to see what's happening. But I guess touching back to what you guys see and what you're seeing, Ja-Nae and Steve, with when you were writing this book and what's happened, like you said, there's a term called IntelliFusion, and the way you're looking at it as not just, the point you made earlier was like that automating a process is really easy, and I think automation's got quite interesting at the moment because people, I'm not really hearing, when I first started this, the AI journal, the automation was being talked about a lot. Like AI wasn't really being talked about. Like it was intelligent automation, RPA, and maybe I was just listening to the wrong people when I was really starting from scratch. I don't know, but it's kind of made me think. Like you say, it's a creative and or you've got the approach right that it's like a creative and cognitive partner, which I've got from this. How do you think it does that? Like with leadership, with productivity, the points you mentioned that I've got here, to like in like the AI enhanced world, and how, I guess my question, if this is worded rightly, like how do you balance up all that innovation and all those things that are possible, like those examples we looked at and the things, against what people might not want you to do or might not want you to know? Like, what if my agent knows things about someone that they said, how have you got that data? I don't want you to know it. Similar with a business.
Yeah. You might,
no, I can tell you're ready to go. I'll
there's it keeps coming back in my head, different examples. If anybody listening, you probably watched the show Westworld.
Yeah.
And there's a couple scenes. There's one where they release all the data about everyone's private profiles and private, like it just, that's one incredibly disruptive. That's exactly what you're referring to, kind of like who owns that information and releasing that, right? Kind of driving chaos into the world. There's another one about there's an agent example. The main character of Dolores drives in on a motorcycle. She's in the real world. She's in in humanity, and that starts to blur anyway. But she rides on a motorcycle. She rides up to a hotel, and she says, "Find me a room," and it basically goes off and does that. And I always equate agent technology to the 5 levels of delegation, and you can look it up on the internet, and it's really kind of like, do I have to tell them exactly, explicitly what to do, and I have to check their work? To, you just do it, and I don't even know. There's like 5, and I think depending on how well it knows you and how well it does it, and that's where, like IntelliFusion, the whole essence of it is the convergence of human and machine intelligence. When we're kind of going beyond using it as a tool, right? We're co-creating, making decisions together, challenging, or kind of really challenging our understanding of intelligence itself. So there's a few things in there. There's this cognitive partnership. We're kind of trying to reach that with kind of the AGI level, where kind of like they think as much as a human. I don't know about the empathy part, but thinking alongside us, right? They're just kind of blurring that boundary of, what is smart, what is human, right? And then this Ja-Nae should really touch upon in the transform model is like the transformation of work, right? Like we talk about this whole new age versus the age of machines. It's like people are having, especially older generations, that's the way the world was, right? You went to work, look at all these executives, if you will, trying to get everyone to return to the office after they profess we would be working from home forever, right?
Yeah.
They trust me, they own a lot of commercial real estate. So just understand where that desire is coming from. I think over time it will shift back, but it transforms, and it also transforms how we look at accountability, transparency, like who's what, is the machine, what part is what, or does it blend? So I think those things for me kind of define that aspect of the book, and it's a core, obviously it's a super shift, it's a core part of it. So Ja-Nae, do you want to kind of ride alongside that?
Yeah. So I first want to zoom out, and then I'll zoom back into today and what we're seeing. So I imagine in 2040 we have Sophie, who is learning history alongside her humanoid Caesar. And she's not only learning from a book, but she's also, Caesar is adapting to our mood. Depending on how she responds, he's going to adapt to, or it will adapt to that response to provide her ways to critically think through situations. They'll head into simulations together where she can then debate with philosophers and also rewrite history. So as we think about that cognitive partner, that's one way in which that can look. Also, when we think about that blend of human, AI, machine, we are already being augmented by AI machine now, right? Like, we are, this iPhone is an extension of myself, as I know it is for other folks. We are heading into gene editing. We are, as we think about the great work that's being done with AI and amputees so that they can actually use their brains to be able to pick up objects.
Yeah.
As we're thinking about even some of the early experiments now, like we have an early telepathic experiment between two researchers at the University of Washington. We have multiple studies between rats being able to be telepathic. We have studies between rats and humans. So as we're thinking about our blurred, or maybe our connected consciousness, there's a lot of opportunities here to imagine what augmentation of human beings might look like with the use of AI and the use of machine. So I'll say that that's really where we're heading, and where we're starting to see bits of these pieces pop up now. As we're thinking about what life looks like, and even, we can focus in on what work looks like now, there's real personal examples of those who are elderly, who are living alone, who talk to Alexa. And Alexa, in many ways, is their companion. AARP out here in the US has done significant research around Alexas as social companions. And
you
so
totally just activated things across people's houses. You realize that, right?
Alexa, talk to me. Tell me a story. But so when we think about that human experience and that connectivity, it's no longer human to human. And as we then move and translate that into business, we need human in the loop when we're utilizing AI within the different functions of our organization. The amount of human in the loop really depends on the task or the function or even the part of the business. Because to get back to an earlier point that you made, when we think about our models right now, for most of the models that we're using within organizations, they need to have a human in the loop, or they're semi-learned learning models. And so they need that training. There's less of that reinforcement that occurs. So these models are only as good as the data in which they have. And sometimes, to go back to your healthcare example, sometimes that data is outdated and we forget to retrain or have our models unlearn based on the data that they actually have. So being able to spend a bit of that time now so that you do have really effective models that can work alongside you is something that I don't see enough organizations focusing in on, where they're just dumping as much data as possible, whether they know it or not, right? Because we adapt and we're like, hey, help me write this email that is going to be in the form of a communication that the recipient's going to be responsive to, right? We're providing more data than we should, and we haven't put enough guardrails in. But if we're not spending the time now to really tighten up those models, we're just really adding and clogging the system, if you will. So that's where I would have people double down if I could today.
Yeah. That's a really, I don't know why it's made me think of this, but the way you were looking at it, Ja-Nae, is, have you ever watched the film? It's quite new, the film Companion. I don't know if you. Oh, it's a great film. I'll type it in, but it's really worth watching.
Is it similar to Her?
Yeah, sort of. Here it is. So if you get a chance, Steve and Ja-Nae, honestly, I'd recommend watching this because it's really interesting. Like, you see it here. So it's got the guy out of Jack Quaid out of the superhero funny thing. So it's got 94%. And I went to watch it, and it's got me thinking about how we communicate with models going forward, similar to what you were saying. And it's really funny as a good film. Like, it's hilarious, but it's also like how we communicate at the moment. Like, to your point, and what I've taken from it. I'm not saying this was your point, but what it's made me think of. Like, what happens when we're feeding these models in real life, and you're starting to see them come in at airports, like digital avatars and different things, and machine reading and point of sale, and I don't know, supermarkets that put you through an automatic scanner where they can. Like, I've seen everything change, and I think the problem with healthcare is, and I'm not a healthcare expert, like I've worked as an advisory role for a healthcare company. Everyone says, from what I understand, and I understand why it's slow, but it's very slow, kind of similar. I mean, insurance are doing a better job, but what I did see firsthand was with the food industry. So when I was working at LAC and we were building food palletizers and conveyor units and safety inspection, all that kind of stuff, a lot of work in that area had to come to a full stop because they didn't know at the time of the pandemic how the virus, the situation was going to cross over to food. And it meant they had to stop a lot of automation solutions, and it's a much bigger, deeper picture than that. But from a top level, that had to stop, and it kind of makes me think, like, to the healthcare example, like, it's like a double-edged sword. Like, you need to move quickly because you need to understand more things to help more people, to help patients, to help patient care, outcomes, all those kind of things. But also at the same time, I guess where I'm going is, like, how do you put a guardrail on that data? And the moment like that, from what you can see from that film, it's kind of like Ex Machina, which I'd imagine you might have seen. It's very similar, and that you've got someone that's translating through natural language and directly putting it into a machine learning model or similar, and all of a sudden you've got all sorts of data that you wouldn't have before, because similar to how Alexa's been in the news from times for picking up conversations, you're not having to stick it into a large language model like Perplexity or ChatGPT, and it's got all this information. And I don't know, that kind of, when I was looking at it, it kind of shook me. I was like, how do you put guardrails around that? Like, it's once something's heard something, regardless of what it is, for law enforcement or healthcare, or I don't know, but kind of a long-winded thought how you can manage that data or make use of it, I guess.
Well, let me ask you this question. What do you do with the sex robots that are booming right now? And listen, it's a huge industry, particularly over in Asia, where though they're not at this point, but there will get to a point where, you're in an intimate moment. you have decided to be in an intimate robot moment with a machine. And with that sometimes comes the sharing of either personal data or data that you wouldn't necessarily want shared with anyone else, but also there's physiological data that gets shared. There's eventually there's things like fluid that gets shared that has genetic data. So there's a larger data conversation that to me is a really fascinating one, but also can be a very dangerous one, depending. So, I bring it up because it's such this outlier example that we don't necessarily consider, but it's a booming industry now, and we haven't identified either the future of that industry and or what the guardrails are there. Yeah. So if we take that as like an extreme, and I love going to extremes so that we can then start to identify what the middle might look like. Yeah. It then can allow us to also identify what are some of the guardrails, even around like bringing it back to an organization. If you have AI in your decision-making process, or you have maybe some companies have AI as a member of the board. Yeah. And so they have a seat at the table. And so when are the instances where that makes sense? And where are the instances where we should reconsider the amount of data that gets shared with either AI and or machines?
Yeah, how do you share that information? It's a big point. Well, who was it? The UAE. They've brought in an AI for like one of their ministers, and you can find it typing it up. I saw it through LinkedIn, and there you go. UAE cabinet approves first of its kind regulatory ecosystem, which is essentially, if you read the full article, got it here, where you can basically bring onto their board, from what I understand, and I mean you have to read it yourself, but essentially you can bring on these AIs. I know him. He's a really cool guy. Basically, how they're going to bring it onto their board, and it's like you've basically got an AI on your board making decisions. And I've seen other people, but my point was basically how that's happening, Ja-Nae. And I wonder if you think do you think that's something we're going to see, Steve and Ja-Nae? Do you think that like a regular thing is going to be like AIs coming on a board, or AIs joining as like a full, we see a LinkedIn profile update, like onboarding an AI? I don't know. It's a fascinating conversation.
I mean, my answer is yes, but I'll be interested to see what Steve says.
I don't think so for a while. I think there's a large Luddite resistance in every type of technology shift. And there's different ways to introduce it. We're seeing a lot of robotics being basically just their brain is ChatGPT. So they're trying to build an anthropomorphic, human simulated, which is a robot, basically a robot. Do I think the software itself? It's a tough call. It comes down to the ethics. It comes down to regulatory. It comes down to hallucinations. Like if it's recommending things, or if it's doing like there's always got to be there's got to be an oversight to it if it's present and known that it's being used. I think to the earlier conversation, I think it's going to be more about augmenting the human. And I think it goes back to, it's one thing to have the system itself out here, or a thing. I can't imagine, for me, even having a robot in the house trying to like do dishes or feed the dog.
Yeah.
Let alone like
Roombas now.
Right, but a Roomba's this tall, not my height, that could kill me if it went rogue, right? It's got, articulating fingers that,
They could hit your foot really hard.
So basically what I'm hearing is Steve's going to walk back one day and Ja-Nae's going to be like, say hello to our new humanoid.
Right. Or the big glowing red eyeball that's on the wall. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
just like the Simpsons episode where Pierce Brosnan's voice soothingly seduces you into submission and obedience. But I think in our book, we talk about in chapter 3, there's I remember it vividly because we were looking at, like, there's a book, obviously, Sapiens, that Yuval Harari wrote.
Yeah.
Then there's Homo Deus, which I have a lot of issue with. We are not gods. I think that's more of a technocratic view. I think there's a thing in between where you're going to have the sapiens, which are like the non-augments, and then you're going to have people in various. That's where Machina comes in, right? People, we have 6 of them, 6. Homo cyberneticus. That's kind of extensive cybernetic enhancements for interfacing, which is kind of what we're talking about. It's like if you have an interface, then there's roboticus, which is the human consciousness and robotic bodies, which is what you're seeing with, like, these different robot models. Go to CES, you'll see it all. Then there's genetica, which Ja-Nae mentioned. There's genetically engineered. You're enhancing your traits, so you're modifying your DNA. And then you can do a blend of these things. But I'm just saying, like, trying to kind of give it, like, definition. There's Virtualis, which is like really living in virtual reality, which is there's a Bruce Willis movie where they were like had doubles, like they live in a pod and they had their doubles go out
Yeah,
and kind
yeah.
of live.
It's
I
crazy.
forget the name of it, but that's an example of that. And then it's like, this is one thing you guys touched upon earlier, and you're talking about Homo Nexus, which is like this interconnect. I'm looking at that, just make sure I get it right. Forming a collective consciousness. I mean, you talk about walking a mile in a person's shoes. What if you literally could? What would that do for, not even like jacked in the whole time, because that could be totalitarianist, like all of your thoughts. But if you were trying to do peace negotiations, what if you're able to really get the perspectives of your adversaries and really understand? Look, I'm not here to get political, but like I remember listening to Putin explain. He went through we interviewed with Tucker Carlson. He had 1,000 years of Ukrainian history.
Yeah.
So there's a root in why he feels that there's right. Whereas the Western, we feel that there's a different alliance to that. But what if you could actually understand those perspectives, right? That's a powerful thought of where we could go as humanity. And then the last one is one of my favorite, is Homo Solaris, which is like adapting for extraterrestrial environments, like plugging in your consciousness. If you want to be if you want to go on explorations, just plug in and you're gone. I think that broadens the mind to what humanity is going to be, what's going to be possible for humanity in this next age.
Yeah.
So it is
Well, and even some of what we need to do, right? I mean, as we become an interplanetary species, as soon as we get to space, our muscles immediately begin to atrophy. So we're going to need to have augmentation so that we are physically prepared for space travel and extended space travel. And that's something that that I know that a lot of folks are working on right now.
Yeah. Well, what you described, Steve, is something I'd buy in a heartbeat if I could find that kind of stuff. I mean, I read a lot, and I read a lot because I just want to understand how these people think. And at the moment, there's no. I could type into an LLM, I guess, or crowdsource all the data and some way get it interpreted, but you can't. It's like an experience. Like AI is never going to replace the experience for my friend's birthday or my partner's birthday or family birthday, whatever, and go to a really nice restaurant. Do you want this wine or do you want that wine? Do you want this plate? Do you want that? Do you want, tables? Like, and there's plenty of other examples. And my point being, like, yeah, to get that kind of emotional kind of, you can't replicate it. It's very hard to, but at the moment that comes into like a VR situation, or I guess kind of what they're building with Neuralink, like I guess that'd be possible, to really live it, to really experience it. And I think that's gonna, Surrogates is the film I think you're thinking of, and similar
that's
to,
it.
yeah,
Yes.
sorry, it's a great film, and Looper's kind of like that because you can live it, and like that was a real headspin film because I was like, I wonder how that would work. But I also agree with your point, Janae, that space is something I'm very bullish on. I think the space industry is booming at the moment. And I think there's going to be a lot of companies for the space infrastructure. I mean, you already see it. Like if you type in, it's a real thing. I might get the wording wrong, but type in inventions that have come from space. There's all sorts of things from like, and it's not saying because we've been in space. It's because of our obsession with space that these inventions have come from. And it's things like the telescope, right through to I think radio waves. To there was something that's used on the space station.
Velcro.
Pardon?
Velcro.
Yeah, Velcro and all those kind of things. And
Okay.
there's a massive list. And it's like, I'd never thought of that. And you think if we do, when we become interplanetary, and I guess it's why I'm kind of interested by quantum computing, because the moment that can figure out, stop using this sort of fuel power, start using this fuel power, that's where you can get a rocket that can go 1,000,000 miles an hour. Like, I'm joking, but I don't know. But those kind of opportunities.
Well, to your point is you were talking about space as a business, but also space as a place. When we think about the movement of humanity over this next age, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want ourselves to be like in this era? And you talk about quantum. We call this first era the quantum era because it is the basis for so much. You think about, we move from transistors to integrated circuits, right? We're moving to a quantum chip. That is going to really fundamentally change how we are able to do things, to do commercial fusion, to your point about propulsion. I do a lot of stuff in the space industry, like propulsion's my bag. Like, how do you create an Alkirby drive? How do you do all these things that we can't process with our current computing? It'll allow us to do other things.
Yeah.
And I think you're right to kind of focus on that. I think this quantum era. And Ja-Nae's, I know, has done a lot of work, so I'd love to get her. She should chime right up because she's done a lot of work in this space.
Well, I don't know if I've done a lot of work in this space, but I definitely have done enough work in this space to know that if you don't have a space strategy as an organization, then you're already behind the 8 ball. And people think, oh, really? Yeah, it is so easy now to start to do tests in space. I mean, you can even hitch a ride on, you could hitch a ride on a rocket now for very little money. And it's been really lovely to see researchers send everything from bacteria to even technology up into space and synthetic technology up into space to figure out how is it going to react. And organizations who are not thinking about what their future is and what that looks like across, we'll say across the stars, are really missing out on a lovely opportunity to explore what that can be. So it's an interesting time, and it's much more affordable than folks actually think that it is. So
yeah, I'll give you an example, Tom. You were like, what? Like,
Yeah, everyone always talks about exit strategy, but space strategy I much prefer.
Well, I think there's people have to have an approach to quantum, or at least looking at it, and that's what I do a lot with. Like, what is the next 5 years? Because every industry's got different rates of change, but it's going to impact everybody. So what level and what aspect? It's a quantum strategy. Space as a business or as a strategic, it has to make sense, of course. Not everybody has to do it, right? But there are companies like Spacebridge Partners. I interviewed their CEO, Sarah Pusho, and she talks about she helps companies get mission money. Like if they're trying to do a mission in a company, trying to do scientific research, trying to match the grant or the funding, get sponsorship behind it. So there are ways. It's not like you have to be some multi-billion-billion-dollar company, to, do something as, it's like this flight of fancy. We're going to do a space. No, it's actually, there are companies that are, to your point, are helping people solve that part of the, approach that part of the business, do that kind of scientific research or type of experiments. But yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's very. I didn't realize that kind of stuff. All I read about was obviously I've looked at like Blue Origin and Galactic and SpaceX. I went to NASA like the end of 2023, which was interesting in Houston. Yeah, you really made me think about that, like how it's going to change, because I think the space industry is going to be. I mean, it will solve a lot, but like all the problems that will come from it, it will be how are we going to occupy Venus? How's America going to, or is China, UK, European Union going to take one planet and someone else take the other planet? There's all sorts of ideas. And, the next podcast, or maybe we'll do a few before that, but one of our podcasts, because I'm sure I can keep talking to you over the next few years about different things, will be on the Voyager station, that hotel they're taking to the
Yes.
space. So I'd be able to sit with both of you and we can have a coffee up in space, 10,000 miles above Earth. That'd be pretty.
And, it's funny you mentioned Venus. I have a lot of, there's the Humans to Venus Foundation, which we've worked with, and people don't think like, wow, how could you go to Venus? It's 800 degrees. Yeah. Well, I didn't know this either, is that it's quicker to get there. It's shorter distance for us to get there. Yeah. It's actually the top layers of the atmosphere are breathable.
Wow.
And it's, it's got 1 G of gravity. So you don't have to deal with, dying on the planet, So you're looking at, you're thinking like Cloud City and Star Wars kind of thing, but you're looking at, orbital platform, but like, or, floating platforms. You could create colonies up there or scientific research like Antarctica has. Like it's just this thing of there's so much potential we have just even begun to dream of, and I think the book itself is really trying to kind of posit that these things will be available. These things will be achievable, possible. It's not just the improbable future, but the probable and possible futures. I think that's what's exciting about that.
Yeah.
So,
well said. So I know I want to be respectful of both your time. So and hopefully we can have many more conversations about all these other topics you mentioned.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We love it. Yeah, after the launch, we could definitely. There's some really good other meaty topics. I think we could definitely jump into
100%. And so tell me, to finish up on, what's kind of your suggestions? I don't really like the word advice in this situation, because like what's your suggestions for people that are kind of what you've just mentioned, Steve, like looking at for what to look at next or what to think about going into it, like with what your book's basically talking about with the shifts that are happening? What would you say people to look? I mean, take the question how you like, but what should they look at? Where should they be thinking about things, or what's the kind of basis framework to think about to both of you? But maybe Steve, you first.
It's a great question.
Do you want me to get started?
Yeah, why don't you seem more? Yeah, you seem ready.
I'm ready.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the first thing that I say to individuals, particularly if we're framing this within work, is identify really what are some of the old heuristics, mental models, even behaviors that you're looking to change within the organization. Because when you're thinking about future-proofing the organization, it's really the identification of where is that resistance? Why does it occur? And then what do we need to do in order to get everyone on the same page to move forward and shift this culture and really have entire behavior change within the organization so that it is one that is future proof and is willing to embrace AI. The second thing that I would do is do almost an audit of essentially what needs to be unlearned. And you can have folks do that from an individual perspective, and I'd also say within your models of, what are some old either data sets or things that we need to eliminate, as we're also thinking about tightening up our own thinking and our models as we're moving into the future. The next thing I would identify is, great, where can we have AI as a partner within our organization? Is it that we're going to utilize models to streamline efficiency within specific business units? Is it that we're incorporating AI into, say, strategic foresight and utilizing AI as we'll say a creative partner, whether or not we're talking about the future of product development and identifying trends on the horizon, whether or not we are scraping and collecting both strong and weak signals and then processing how to make sense of those within the organization, or even if we're doing adaptive scenario planning to figure out what might be the best and what might be the worst case scenario, and maybe some scenarios in the middle. And then what are some of those themes that we can tease out between those scenarios so that we have, and do that with AI, or, you could do all of that with Gen AI, so that we can start to identify the steps that we need to take forward, right? Because technology is never going to be slower than it is today. And so really identifying some of the small baby steps that you can incorporate AI, but then also how you can get folks to not feel afraid of, it's going to replace my job. No, really, it's an augmentation of who I am, just the same as my iPhone is right now. Steve, what do you have to add on?
I'm cautiously optimistic. So I think that AI can be a multiplier of human potential, but if we got to build it with purpose, not just for profit.
Yeah.
I think that's always the challenge. I slightly just it's a different take. I mean, I use obviously AI for my foresight work, for innovation, ideation, and things like that. But it's not just a tool. We're entering this new age where AI is going to become part of the cognitive process, and it's going to change us as we use it. And I think, the whole thing for us is about not just reacting. And as futurists, you want to navigate, you want to design for the future. And, my hope is that you can use this book to kind of give you fuel for optimism and growth and not fear. And that it will give you the ability to be in, the future belongs to the intentionally curious, I think. So I think if you are definitely on this podcast listening, you are probably one of them, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So I think the book would really be your cup of tea.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, being curious, that's there's so much stuff that fascinates me in this world. And a saying I like to wrap it up is, that I heard say was, AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now, which always kind of sticks with me. I don't know how true that is, but you think it's only going to get better and better and better and better. So it's like, it's a fascinating world we're living in. But yeah, Super Shifts, it's out now. I'm looking forward to going to read it. Is it out now, or I got 40 days here? Is it?
Would depend on when you're publishing. It's coming out April 29th, and you can go to Super Shifts book. It's got links to Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Supershifts.com.
Supershiftsbook.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes
Yes.
as well, which will be really exciting. But Ja-Nae, Steve, I've loved having you on. I'm looking forward to talking to you both again. Thanks for spending the time and blowing my mind on a few different topics. I'm definitely going to go research some space companies right now.
Mission accomplished. That's great.
Love it. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you.